The wanted poster appeared in Silver Creek on a Tuesday morning, nailed to every hitching post and storefront from the saloon to the general store. But this wasn't a criminal's face staring back at the townspeople. It was an invitation, written in elaborate script that seemed too refined for the dust-blown streets of 1887 Arizona territory. Grand competition, it declared. 10 days hence. The greatest riders, ropers, and sharpshooters shall compete for a prize beyond measure, the hand of Kaya, daughter of Chief Nantan of the White Mountain Apache. Her father offers this union to bridge our peoples and end generations of bloodshed. May the worthiest man win her heart and secure peace for all. Thomas Brennan stood before that poster for a full 5 minutes, his calloused hands still holding the reins of his tired mare. At 32, he was too old for foolishness and too weathered for romance. His face bore the map of hard years, a scar along his jaw from a war that felt like another lifetime, sun-creased eyes that had seen too much death, and a mouth that had forgotten how to smile after burying his wife and infant daughter to fever 3 winters past. He worked a small ranch 15 miles outside town, barely scraping by, speaking to no one unless necessary. The other ranchers called him, the Ghost, because he drifted through life as if he'd left his soul somewhere in the past. But something about those words stopped him cold. Not the promise of a bride, Thomas had locked that part of his heart in a grave, but the phrase, end generations of bloodshed. He'd served as a cavalry scout in his younger days and had witnessed the brutal campaigns against the Apache. He'd seen villages burned, children orphaned, warriors shot down under flags of truce. He'd also seen settlers massacred, their homes reduced to ash, families destroyed in the endless cycle of revenge. The violence had disgusted him then and haunted him still. If there was even a chance this competition could bring peace, didn't he have some obligation to ensure it went to someone honorable? By sunset, Silver Creek had transformed into a carnival of ambition and greed. Men poured in from every direction, cowboys, drifters, professional gunslingers, and eastern dandies who'd never sat a horse but came for the exotic promise of an Indian princess. The saloons overflowed with boasting and whiskey. Thomas heard them as he purchased supplies. "I'll win that squaw and sell her to a Wild West show for a fortune," one man laughed. "Chief must be desperate to offer up his daughter like livestock," another sneered. "I hear she's a real beauty. Once I win her, I'll teach her some civilized manners," a third added with a cruel grin. Thomas's jaw clenched so hard his teeth ached. These men saw Kaya as a trophy, a curiosity, a means to wealth or status. They spoke of peace but reeked of exploitation. That night, unable to sleep in his rented room above the livery stable, Thomas made a decision that surprised even himself. He would enter this competition. Not to win, he had no desire to force a marriage on anyone, but to ensure that if he could help it, Kaya wouldn't end up with one of these vultures. And if by some chance he did win, he would give her a choice, freedom to leave or a marriage of respect and partnership, nothing more. The morning of the competition dawned clear and merciless, the sun already brutal at 7 a.m. The event took place in a natural amphitheater 5 miles north of town, where canyon walls created a bowl of red rock that could seat thousands. And thousands came, settlers, soldiers from the nearby fort, Apache families who traveled from the reservation, curiosity seekers from as far as California. In a shaded area to the east sat Chief Nantan with his council of elders, their faces carved from stone, revealing nothing. And beside the chief sat Kaya. Thomas caught his breath when he saw her. She wasn't the demure maiden he'd half expected, some resigned victim of political necessity. Kaya sat with the bearing of a warrior queen, her back straight as a rifle barrel, her dark eyes scanning the gathered competitors with an expression that mixed contempt, curiosity, and something that might have been despair. She wore traditional Apache dress, a doeskin tunic decorated with intricate beadwork and tin cone tinklers that chimed softly when she moved, but there was nothing decorative about her presence. She radiated intelligence and barely contained fury. This was a woman who'd clearly argued against this arrangement and lost. A woman who would not be won easily, nor should she be. 43 men entered the competition. The first event was bronc riding, untamed horses from the Apache herds, animals that had never felt a saddle and had no intention of accepting one. Thomas watched as one after another, the competitors were thrown, trampled, or gave up before even mounting. The Eastern dandies were eliminated within minutes. The professional showman lasted longer but ultimately couldn't match the raw skill required. When Thomas's turn came, he drew a paint stallion with eyes like black fire and hooves that struck sparks from the stones. He didn't try to dominate the horse. That had never been his way. Instead, as he settled into the saddle, he spoke softly in a language he'd learned during his scouting days, words from the Chiricahua dialect that meant, brother, and peace, and, we'll do this together. The stallion still bucked, still fought, but something in Thomas's touch was different. He moved with the animal rather than against it, and when his 8 seconds ended, both horse and rider were still upright. The crowd roared, but Thomas noticed that Kaya had leaned forward slightly, her eyes narrowed with interest. The second event was roping, catching a running calf in the shortest time. Thomas was competent but not exceptional, finishing in the middle of the pack. A cocky rancher's son from Texas took this round, whooping and showboating for the crowd. The third event was sharpshooting, and here Thomas's cavalry training showed. While others aimed for stationary targets, the real test came in the final round, hitting clay pigeons at various distances while on horseback. Thomas's hands were steady, his breathing controlled, and he shattered 7 of 8 targets. Only one other man, a former Army sniper named Cord Mackey, matched his score. As the sun reached its zenith, 15 men remained. The next challenge was announced, a test of wilderness skills. Each competitor would be given a knife, a canteen, and a compass, then left 10 miles into the canyon lands. The first 3 to return to the amphitheater with proof they'd reached a specific landmark, a lightning-struck cottonwood by an ancient Apache holy site, would advance to the final round. There was water along the way, the judge explained, if you knew where to look. There was also danger, rattlesnakes, scorpions, flash flood channels, and the punishing heat that had killed more men than all the Apache raids combined. Thomas knew these lands. During his scouting years, he'd learned to read the desert the way educated men read books. He knew that water hid in the shade of certain rocks, that particular plants pointed toward underground springs, that the Apache had traveled these paths for centuries and had left signs for those wise enough to read them. As he set out, he noticed something that troubled him. Cord Mackey was following close behind, and in Mackey's eyes was a calculating coldness that spoke of more than competition. 3 hours into the trek, Thomas found the lightning-struck cottonwood. The tree stood like a skeletal hand reaching toward heaven, its wood bleached white by sun and time. Nearby, ancient petroglyphs covered the cliff face, spirals and handprints and figures of dancers that had witnessed centuries of Apache prayers. Thomas took his proof, a distinctive seed pod that only grew on this specific tree, and began the return journey. That's when he heard the scream. It came from a ravine 200 yards to his left, a sound of pure terror that cut through the desert silence. Every instinct told Thomas to keep moving. He was in second place, maybe first, and stopping would cost him the competition. 3 other competitors were still out here somewhere, and any of them could pass him while he investigated. But the scream came again, and Thomas found his feet turning toward it before his mind finished arguing. At the bottom of a steep arroyo, he found Martin Jessup, a young cowboy from New Mexico who'd entered the competition hoping to make a name for himself. Jessup had tried to climb down to reach a water source and had fallen, his leg bent at an angle that made Thomas's stomach turn. Even worse, a diamondback rattler was coiled 3 feet from the injured man, its warning rattle filling the air like maracas of death. "Don't move," Thomas called down, his voice steady despite the urgency pounding through his veins. Not even to breathe heavy. Thomas could have left. Should have left, by any rational measure. Jessup had other competitors who might come this way. The young man would probably survive if he kept still until help arrived. But probably wasn't certainly, and Thomas had seen too much death to walk away from a man in need. He scrambled down the loose rock face, positioning himself between Jessup and the snake. When the rattler struck, Thomas was ready, catching it behind the head with one swift motion. Dawn broke over Silver Creek with the kind of crystalline clarity that made every detail sharp and unforgiving. Thomas splashed water on his face from the horse trough behind the livery, startling at his own reflection. The face that stared back looked different somehow, still scarred, still weathered, but no longer quite so dead behind the eyes. He touched the turquoise stone that now hung on a leather cord around his neck, hidden beneath his shirt, and wondered if he was a fool for reading meaning into a simple gesture of acknowledgement. The final round was scheduled for noon, but the amphitheater began filling at sunrise. This was the event everyone had been waiting for, the ultimate test that would determine who would win the right to marry Kaya and, ostensibly, cement a peace treaty between the Apache and the settlers of the territory. Thomas arrived early and found a quiet spot to check his gear and, more importantly, to observe his remaining competition. Cord Mackey stood near the competitor's area, cleaning his rifle with methodical precision. The former sniper was a tall man with the kind of handsomeness that concealed rather than revealed, a smooth face that showed nothing of the violence Thomas suspected lived behind it. Mackey had the endorsement of several wealthy ranchers and the territorial governor himself, men who saw this marriage as a business opportunity, a chance to gain influence over Apache lands and resources. Thomas had heard them talking last night in the saloon. Once Mackey was married to the chief's daughter, they'd pressure the tribe to sell their best grazing land, to allow mining surveys, to modernize, in ways that would strip them of everything they had left. The rancher's son from Texas, Clay Hutchins, was busy showing off for a group of young women who'd come to watch. He was skilled but immature, the kind of man who'd treat a wife like another possession to display. And Diego Chavez, the quiet vaquero, remained an enigma, skilled and respectful, but Thomas had seen him accepting money from a man Thomas recognized as a Wild West show promoter. Even Diego, it seemed, had ulterior motives. At 11 o'clock, Chief Nantan and his entourage arrived, and once again, Thomas found himself unable to look away from Kaya. Today she wore a mixture of Apache and settler clothing, a white blouse embroidered with traditional symbols, and a riding skirt that suggested she expected to participate in something beyond sitting and watching. Her long dark hair was plaited in a single braid decorated with silver ornaments that caught the light like captured stars. But it was her expression that riveted Thomas. She looked like a woman who'd come to a decision, though what that decision might be was impossible to read. The judge, a territorial magistrate brought in for his supposed impartiality, stood to announce the final challenge. "Gentlemen," his voice boomed across the amphitheater, "you've proven yourselves in riding, roping, shooting, and survival. But a true man of the West must possess one more quality, the ability to work with a partner. This land is too harsh, too unforgiving for any man to conquer alone. Therefore, your final test will be conducted in teams, each of you paired with the woman whose hand you seek. You and Miss Kaya will complete an obstacle course that will test your ability to communicate, to trust, and to work as one. The man who completes it in the shortest time, with the highest marks for cooperation, will be declared the winner." A murmur rippled through the crowd. This was unprecedented, and Thomas could see several competitors looking distinctly uncomfortable. They'd expected another display of masculine prowess, not a test of partnership. Even more surprising, Kaya stood and walked down to the competitor's area with the fluid grace of a mountain lion, her face still unreadable. The course itself was elaborate, a series of challenges that required both partners to participate. There was a section where one person was blindfolded and had to be guided by the other's voice through a maze of obstacles. A puzzle that required both to contribute pieces. A wall that was too high for one person to scale alone. A river crossing where balance and coordination meant the difference between success and a dunking in cold water. And finally, a shooting challenge where one person held the rifle while the other spotted and called out targets. Mackey went first. His approach was exactly what Thomas expected. He gave commands, and when Kaya didn't respond quickly enough to his barking orders, his frustration showed. They completed the course but with visible tension, Kaya's jaw tight with anger at being ordered about like a recruit. Clay Hutchins was worse. He tried to charm and flirt his way through, treating the whole exercise like a courting game while Kaya did most of the actual work, her contempt visible to everyone watching. Diego Chavez showed more respect, but there was no real connection, just professional courtesy that left both of them as strangers who happened to be working toward the same goal. Then it was Thomas's turn. He approached Kaya where she stood waiting, and for a long moment they simply looked at each other. Up close, he could see the intelligence in her dark eyes, the strength in the set of her shoulders, and something else, a deep weariness that matched his own. This was a woman who'd fought against this arrangement and lost, who'd been forced into a position where her entire future hung on the outcome of what amounted to a theatrical performance. "I'm sorry," Thomas said quietly, speaking in the Apache words Nahilze had taught him so many years ago. "This is wrong. You shouldn't have to be a prize." Kaya's eyes widened slightly, surprise at hearing her language, perhaps, or surprise at the sentiment. And yet, she replied in English, her voice rich and carefully modulated, "Here we are. If I must dance in this white man's circus, I prefer a partner who at least acknowledges the indignity of it." "Then let's get through it," Thomas said. "And Kaya, I need you to know something before we start. If by some chance I win this thing, you don't have to marry me. I'll refuse the prize. You'll be free to choose your own path." She studied him with an intensity that felt like being seen for the first time in years. "You would give up land rights, political influence, everything that comes with this alliance?" "I don't want any of it. I just want..." Thomas paused, surprised by the truth that emerged. "I just want to know that one thing in this godforsaken territory happened because it was right, not because it served someone's greed." "Then let us show them," Kaya said, and Thomas saw the ghost of a smile touch her lips, what partnership actually looks like. They began the course, and something extraordinary happened. Years of living close to the land had taught Thomas to be observant, to notice small details, to move with rather than against natural.